Well, thank you. And thanks for the opportunity to speak at this important convention. Um, I'm actually from the United States, but I'm going to be speaking about some work I'm doing related to Germany. And in this work, we'll be going from uh, most of the presentations focusing on individuals and treatment. Here we're going to look at the population as a whole and try to get some idea of how vaping might affect the population, in particular, its role with smoking. And I'm going to use a model that I've developed a while back called the smoking and vaping model, or SAVEM, as I call it. And it specifically looks at the health impacts of smokers switching from cigarettes to nicotine vaping products, NVPs. I don't like the term e-cigarettes. Electronic can apply to lots of things. It's unclear. The key is that there's vaping and there's nicotine, which is important in switching from cigarettes. And what we've done is we've developed this program in an Excel format. We have an extensive user guide, and the idea is that other countries can use it. And it's relatively simple. You pick a period over which you'd like to examine, the projection period, and you apply country-specific data, and it shows you how different cohorts progress. So our basic goal is a user-friendly model that can be used by countries, states, or other areas to show the public health impact of vaping use and examine the impact of relevant parameters. We published a paper very recently on the US model in which we validated the model and provided extensive results showing positive impacts of vaping. And that was in the journal Population Metrics. We also have several papers with another model of mine, not to be confused, called the SimSmoke model, where we showed major effects of vaping for the US, England, and Canada. So now to the SAVA model itself. The way it's structured is we first start off with a no and vaping scenario. That projects what would happen in the absence of e-cigarettes. In a sense, that's a counterfactual in a country that has e-cigarettes. And we do that by applying data, projecting trends from before e-cigarettes or vaping was introduced. Then on top of that, we have what we call the NVP scenario that incorporates explicitly vaping and allows the trajectories in smoking and vaping that result from the use of NVPs. Based on that, we look at the difference between those two, and that gives us public health impacts in terms of smoking and vaping prevalence, smoking attributable deaths, and life years lost. So it speaks directly to health issues. So starting off with the no NVP scenario, and this is for Germany, where the model began in 2012. We used Germany's population. The U.S. Mortality rates are distinguished by current, former, and never smoker, but we translate those into German rates using Germany death rates. And similarly, we translate life years lost into comparable German level outcomes. Now, the most important part in this is, we have underlying this very complex smoking model, a cohort model, and we translate that into the German experience using preferably one of the larger, more complete data sets. And we use a data set called the 2012 GIDA. matched up with our initial year and broken down by age and gender. And we also use that to transform the initiation and cessation rates, which are used for progression. So that's the part of the model that projects the impact of smoking in the absence of e-cigarettes. Now we move to the part that incorporates cigarettes, and we incorporate the transitions, the usual transitions to smoking, but also never users can transition into e-cigarettes. They can also quit e-cigarettes as they can quit former smoking. But an important part of that is that current smokers can often switch to e-cigarettes, which they may use instead of e-cigarettes, or they can, and we consider them, if they're under age 35, as just e-cigarette users, because much of the smoking risks decline rapidly over time. But those over 35 do carry the smoking risk, but now have the risk of former smokers. And we allow for the former smokers to that are using e-cigarettes to also quit e-cigarettes. So there's I guess 6 types of parameters. First is the risk itself. And we look at the risks relative to the excess risk of cigarettes. We assign a value of 5%. We usually consider higher risk because this is a very controversial area among people who talk about e-cigarettes. The other risk we use is that vaping is 40% the risk of smoking. Much higher than I think is the case, but just to show how that impacts the results. We have an NVP switching rate, that is the switching from smokers to exclusive, not dual, exclusive cigarette use. We have multipliers that transform the smoking rates in the NVP case into vaping rates, and usually vaping is some percentage of that. And we use the smoking rates in the no NVP scenario because that gives it some age and cohort structure. We also allow for smoking initiation. Generally, what we have is a multiplier that indicates less smoking initiation, and that's clearly the experience in the United States, where smoking rates among youth and young adults have dropped by somewhere between 60 and 90% in the last 5 years, which is pretty dramatic. We allow for vaping cessation, and we also allow for smoking cessation. Now, how those are impacted by vaping. So let's get to the results. Here are the results for males. And first, again, we have the no vaping scenario, which for Germany, what we show, and these are preliminary results, let me say at the outset. We show that the smoking rate declines very slowly over time in the absence of e-cigarettes. And that is, by the way, the experience in Germany, at least up until vaping came onto the scene. But when we go to the vaping scenario, we see greater declines. Not seen so much at first, but which grow over time. And to see the difference, you look here at the relative change in smoker prevalence, and you see that even by 2017, starting in 2012, there's a 6% reduction, but it increases to up to 20%. Based on that, we show the number of deaths averted, smoking and vaping attributable deaths. Those are 197, almost 200,000. And the life years saved, about 3.5 million. This is just for males. Similarly, we have the results for females. I won't go through those, but you see basically the same thing. some really quite important reductions in smoking rates and some additional deaths averted and life years lost also averted. What we do is we validate the model. Other models that have been out there, people run them and say, these are what we think are the estimates. We actually compare the models to the data. We did this to the United States and it fit quite well. We're doing this now with Germany. We're still trying to find an appropriate data set. We're using Eurobarometer, but the sample size on that small. We're also collecting data from the microcensus and the GITA and its updates. But this gives you some idea. We seem to be fitting with the data fairly well. But again, one thing I really want to show that's important is before e-cigarettes, like our model shows in the no vaping case, the reductions in smoking were very slow. They sped up a little after 2005 because there were some tobacco control laws, but then they speeded up again after 2013, around the time that e-cigarettes became more prominent. Now, I want to talk about something, and this is why I called the model preliminary. We're trying to come up with a better understanding of e-cigarettes in Germany. And our model here does not predict so well. It implies an increase in vaping over time. However, what we see in the data, and this is using DEBRA, but we've also looked at other data sources which indicate declines in vaping. And I would also point out that the rates of use in Germany are substantially lower than in the US. In other words, in the US, we've seen rates among 18 to 24-year-olds of around 12%. So it's much, much lower. And we're talking about regular vaping. That's another problem. The data doesn't really distinguish regular from, people that vape once a month, get together with their friends once a month. That's not what's relevant. That's not what has the ultimate impact on health. It's the regular vaping. It's also the regular vaping that leads smokers to switch away from vaping. So, again, we're looking more at the data, and that's going to be very important in our future studies. And we want to understand the laws regarding vaping. We think that some of both the lower use of e-cigarettes and the declining use in e-cigarettes comes from the stricter policies which Germany has implemented, both at a local and at a national level, particularly in the last 2 years, where, as I understand it, a major tax is expected to go into effect in Germany in the very near future, if it hasn't already gotten into effect. So again, we're trying to understand these things. We're looking at the many different data sets available for Germany. The results I present here are preliminary. And as we get better information and work with people in Germany, we will adjust the model so that it more accurately reflects the German experience. One thing we always do with our analysis is sensitivity analyses, looking at the impact of different parameters, because we know that they're subject to uncertainty, but that also tells us the most important parameters. And in past work, we find that switching and smoking cessation rates are particularly important. So it's important. The earlier work that talks about vaping and its effectiveness, it's important to make the most effective vaping products available if you want to see switching to smoking. And again, you could see that in the model, and the model can also be used to show the impact of different policies. One final point is, I've talked I mentioned a couple of times about the data. Uh, One of the things that we found already from the Germany model is Germany needs better data on vaping. They need consistent data. They need to relate it to regular data, regular smoking, look closely at these relationships. And this is going to be important in the future. Let me just conclude by saying that not only do I encourage your comments on the German model, but we work with other countries to develop models, and I'd be glad to talk with you about that. Thank you.